Call me. Okay, we'll call the regular board meeting of the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District to order at 6:30. To start with, I think we ought to go around and introduce who we are, so that we have an idea of the people that are online. I'll start. I'm Larry Swope. I'm the president of the Watershed District.
Why don't we do, we'll do the rest of our board and then I'll jump over to Velamo and then do our staff and stuff too. You want me to go and pick on people?
Yeah.
Okay. Diane, you can go next.
Yeah, I'm Diane Ward, and I'm also a member of the board and current treasurer.
And Cliff?
Cliff Eichinger, current vice president and retiring this month.
And Val?
Val Eisel, I'm just a board member.
Just a board member. And then we have one more board member that's not on yet, Pam Skinner. And then I'm Tina Carsons. I'm the administrator of the Watershed District. And then I'll pass it to Phil if you want to do your introductions, and then we can go through the rest of the staff.
Sure, thank you. Phil Belfiore, administrator with Velamo. And I believe we have two board members here. Patricia.
I am Patricia Euchre, board member treasurer, Velamo.
Thank you. And then Chair Linder is here, Jim Linder.
Yeah, Jim Linder. I am the chair of the Velamo Board of Directors.
And I don't know, is Dan, I can't see all the boxes, or maybe I can, I'm not sure. Is Dan Jones here from the city of White Bear? Not yet.
I do not see. And Dawn.
And then Dawn Tanner is also here. Dawn?
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Dawn Tanner, Program Development Coordinator at Velamo.
So Councilmember Dan Jones from White Bear may join us, and then potentially City Engineer, Public Works Director Jesse Farrell from City of Venice Heights may join us as well.
Okay.
Thanks, Phil. Rounding out the rest of our people, I am going to start with Paige.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paige Alberg, project manager for the Watershed District.
And Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Nicole Soderholm. I'm the permit coordinator at Ramsey-Washington.
And Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Lindeman. I'm actually with Bar Engineering. We're the district engineers for Ramsey-Washington.
And Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Provost, and I'm a water quality monitoring technician at the district.
Great. And Tracy?
Hi, I'm Tracy Gallowitz. I'm the attorney for the Ramsey-Washington Watershed District.
Bill?
Hey everyone, I'm Bill Bartologgi. I'm the natural resources for Ramsey-Washington Watershed.
Mary.
Hey everyone, I'm Mary Fitzgerald, and I'm the inspector with the district.
Dave?
I'm with the Watershed District and the project coordinator.
Great. Tyler?
Hi everyone, Tyler Olson. I'm also with Bar Engineering, presenting on a project within the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District tonight.
Thanks, Tyler. And then Bert, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Bert Johnson, citizen, and I'm president of the Twin Lake Association.
Okay. Bert, did you want to speak tonight during visitor comments?
Yes, please.
Okay. And then I have somebody labeled as Sky on the call tonight.
Sorry. Yep. Also just a citizen. Good to be here.
Great. Can I just get your first and last name so we can record it in our minutes as well?
Sorry. Yep. I'll go ahead and put it in the comments.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's everybody.
Okay, thank you. Next order of business is to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll move to approve it.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, Tina, call the roll.
Okay, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Val,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye. Okay, now we have recognition of Cliff Eichinger. And we have in the board packet is a certificate that we're going to give to Cliff. I just want to make a couple of comments about Cliff. This could be his last meeting. I don't know. You never know how these things are going to go. But the thing I miss a lot about Cliff is he is really an integral part of the watershed and water community. Any place you go, any of the meetings that I'm in, Cliff is normally in too, but everybody knows him. I believe from talking to Cliff, he was the first employee of the watershed district after it was formed. He was a consultant before then. And some of the highlights of things that he did that we're all grateful for is he bought the belt line, so we have a place to water. That's a good thing. Decided that it was best to have our own office, which I think is a really good thing and felt well for us. He championed the Stormwater Research Council when Cliff was off doing some other things and I was in some meetings. His name came up repeatedly about that. And I think that was quite an accomplishment. He did champion, and it's the only reason why some of us are here, is getting the Grass Lake Watershed District into the RWMWD, which is kind of a highlight of the talk tonight. And he was a champion of public art, which you can see if you walk into our building. And if you read a little vignette on our website about Cliff's feelings about public art. We will miss his technical and historical insights. Mainly we'll miss the way that he conducts himself as a true gentleman in any circumstance. The one thing I will say is that we're talking about having a event for Cliff. Now that things are loosening up, we'll find out more about that later. But at some point, I don't know if it's still there. I didn't have time to look at it, but there was quite a documentation on his retirement party, and it was exciting. So hopefully we'll have something like that for you when you when things get a little more settled with stuff. Tina, to make sure we have another one to hopefully rival that one. So 40 years and 7 years on the board, appreciate it. We really are going to miss you, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. It was very nice.
Yeah.
And anybody else have comments, please?
I've had the pleasure to work beside Cliff since 1987. And everything you said, Larry, is just spot on. And what I've also noticed is just always how impeccable you were, Cliff. There were tense moments. There were tense moments on the board. There could be tense moments with citizens. And always your position was stated without judgment and clear and informed. And I just think we couldn't ask for a better citizen to be a civil servant than you. And I just want to thank you for the honor of being able to work beside you for that long.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Tracy and Larry said, and especially for me, Cliff was just a wonderful resource. He didn't always have to be as patient as he was, but giving me history or explanations really helped me be a better servant to the citizens on the board. And I really appreciated that, Cliff. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I too have had the privilege of working beside Cliff since 1987 as well, Tracy. We enjoyed many years. And I think one of the things that comes to mind as something in addition that I appreciate about Cliff is his forward thinking and his fearlessness in taking, calculated risks. He's known throughout the water resources community as a leader and has helped this watershed be, the leader in the state of Minnesota amongst watershed districts. And I've had the privilege of working alongside Cliff as well as many at BAR, and I know they really enjoy working with you, Cliff, and we will all miss you very much. Thank you for your many years of service.
Thanks. I'll definitely miss everybody else too. It's been a long time and close working relationships. It's difficult to part with something like that, but I won't be a stranger. I'll stop by and hassle the staff in the office or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say from a staff perspective, we said our retirement goodbyes at that party, which was really fun. And we also had a lot of flute players on staff. So we had a little live band action going for that. That was really fun. So I don't know if we can resurrect that. We might have to dust off our flutes, but right, Paige?
Well, it was recorded, I think, both in video and audio, so we could play it again.
We could just replay it. That's
a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
But besides being a mentor to me, I know you built our staff from the ground up, and many of them are still here, and that's a real testament to your leadership. And I can only hope that I can continue that legacy on from here. And I just really have appreciated your insights as a board member too, which is, a different perspective than we've had. And it's been a really, just a pleasure to have you around, and you're living the van life dream now, and can't wait to hear and see how that goes.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the comments I had previously, I've told Tina that my transition from staff person to board member, there was a 2-year gap there, but it was hard for me to not view it as being a staff person. So I had to bite my tongue a number of times and not answer as a staff person, although I did sometimes, and I regretted some of that, and I apologize for it, but it worked out okay. But
absolutely,
it was a challenge to go from staff member to board member, but I valued the 2 terms I was able to be in the board.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Anybody else have comment?
One thing I didn't appreciate, I felt like when Cliff and I started playing golf together, I could beat him once in a while. And then that soon started to be Cliff beating me every time. And now he's left me in the dust, I think, forever. So.
Well, you didn't play enough. That was the problem. You got too involved with bar engineering.
Yeah, maybe so.
You had the job hold you back.
You just have to know when to quit, Brad. I played tennis so I could beat him, and then once I could tell he could start to beat me, I quit.
Oh, no. I never beat you. Tracy was an all-star. You probably don't know that. She was inducted to the Sports Hall of Fame for college. What was that? What was your college again?
Cornell. It was Cornell College.
Yeah.
But
in tennis, so she was good. Probably still is. I'm still playing, but not nearly like I used to.
Okay. All right. Anybody else comments before we leave Cliff alone?
Yeah, let's move on. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Cliff. We appreciate it, and we really are going to miss you.
Thanks.
Consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Discussion. I have 2 discussion items about this. One is on the gold line. It says that the wetlands is incidental. What does that mean?
Yeah, so during the gold line delineation in 2018, we looked at dozens of wetlands along the corridor. The Wetland Conservation Act defines incidental wetlands as artificially created in upland, not for the purposes of creating a wetland. So in this case, both these parcels on either side of, I think it's Wood Lane here, they were mass graded during a common plan of development. I don't pretend to know what year, but we looked at historical photos, previous site plans, and essentially the wetland areas were artificially created from mass grading activities. So they're not historical or natural wetlands, and they don't get the same protections under the Wetland Conservation Act. They're essentially accidentally created.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask a question on that same permit? Quick.
Sure.
Larry? Yeah. Could you say more about special provision bullet number 1? I was trying to understand. Was there, there was an increase, but it didn't help me understand. Like, is it a large increase for that 2 to 10 year piece?
Yeah, it's a small increase, and our rules are such that they have to meet or reduce discharge rates off the site as a whole. So we do identify when certain corners of the site where water is leaving in increasing rates, and that's a local authority's decision to determine if that is okay to enter their storm sewers. So the project as proposed meets our rules, but we just like to have that extra checkpoint with cities or counties or whoever's receiving that water to make sure it's okay.
Okay, and so it's really it's that the city Woodbury acknowledges that and can handle it. Is what? Okay, that's what.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
what I've heard from the team is that they've already been reviewing that, and that the Gold Line team thinks it's not going to be an issue. If it is an issue, they'll have to, increase their storage or otherwise revise the design, but it's a small increase, so should be able to do that.
The other comment that I had was on change order number 1. Thank you for accommodating Roger Stanky. I have met with Roger in the field out there. He's a very interesting person, and even though it may not have been technically necessary, I think it's a really good thing that we went and accommodated him, because he's had some pretty bad experiences with flooding and was a little uptight about things. When I got to meet him, he was a little uptight with me too, but that's okay. So thank you. Okay, any other discussion of the consent agenda? All right, call the roll, Tina.
Okay, Cliff. Diane.
Aye.
Cliff.
I said aye. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And Val.
Aye.
And Larry.
Aye. All right. On to item number 5, visitor comments. We have 2 visitors that would like to make comments. We'll start with Bert. Hi, Bert. Good to see you again, kind of. I can see your name.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. Yeah, just a couple comments. Bert Johnson, president of Twin Lake Association, reside at 205 Twin Lake Trail. And the Twin Lake Association was founded with the idea that we needed to come together as a community with those of us living around Twin Lake to ensure that the flooding that we had experienced, the inundation that we experienced, which originated from West Vadnais, doesn't happen again, and that there be an outlet installed on Twin Lake. And then third, just to continue to monitor and preserve the water quality and clarity of Twin Lake, which has been very good historically. So those are the 3 founding principles of the Twin Lake Association. To the watershed as well. I know that as we were kind of going through that flood, he really did conduct himself the way that Larry described, which was, you could say that was tense, and it was. People were had a lot of questions, and I thought Cliff there's a meeting in particular where he really handled himself extremely well under pressure. And I just hope his van life goes very well. So very interested in hearing about his adventures later on. I did want to say one thing. I know that VLAMO board members are here as well. And just the members that from Twin Lake Association to the members of VLAMO, that I think it's important just from a citizen perspective to think about two different public bodies where the flooding at Twin Lake originated from really the border, the span between VLAMO and Twin Lake. And from a public citizen perspective, it really doesn't matter whether the risk is on VLAMO or the risk is on Ramsey-Washington watershed. These public bodies, watershed districts, or water management organizations that are intended to manage water. And you know, from a citizen perspective, it isn't about the risk for any entity, but it's about the our ability to prevent flooding and manage water to the best of our ability. So for those reasons, I think for people in our area, I think it's important that there not be a border that prevents that water management between West Vadnais and Twin Lake, because we experienced it firsthand. And that's really my comment for today. So thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Bert. Oh, Larry, you're muted.
And Sky wanted to make a comment.
Nope, I was just listening. Thank you.
Okay. And did Melissa King just join?
Yeah, Melissa, do you want to introduce yourself? Melissa, can you hear us?
I can, sorry. Trying to find my mute buttons. I'm Melissa King. I'm a board conservationist with the Board of Water and Soil Resources. This particular area is within my service area, so I'm just here to listen to the conversation.
Okay. Okay, good. Any more visitor comments? I guess not. That was the only visitor we had. Thank you, Bert. Good to see you again. It's been a while, in fact. With that, we get to item number 6, which is the West Vadnais discussion with the the Vadnais Lake Area Watershed Management Association. Oh, let's, Tina, do you want to lead this off, or would you like to lead it off?
I can kick it off and then I'll turn it over to you just to start the discussion. Welcome to our VLAMO neighbors. We have had some conversations over the last several years, as was mentioned already a little bit by Bert Johnson, a resident. You know, when we've had some flooding concerns in this area of West Vadnais Lake and some of the management that the watershed district has done, you know, we're right, that border is a little unique in that the water flows out of our district into VLAMO and then back into our district. So there's been some conversations over the years about, you know, how we should continue to look at the management of West Vadnais Lake as it impacts our district from a flood risk perspective, as well as a water quality perspective. So we felt we were at a point now where we should invite the conversation together between the two boards. Phil and I have had a number of conversations over the last year as well in that discussion. So I did in the board packet, I laid out some of the discussion points that my board has had over the last several months about, kind of what the starting point that they're coming from, and then what they're looking forward into the future. So I guess we can go from there. And Larry, I'll turn it back to you to start the discussion.
Okay, first of all, the fun about it is that the cooperation with VLAMO has been very good. There were a couple of delays that worked into the system with an EAW that are just a matter of process more than anything else. But everything that we've wanted to do, we can do. It's just that we're going through somebody else's property to do it. And as Tina said, the two areas of interest are water quality, because we take water out of Owasso, Grass Lake, put it into West Vadnais Lake, and then bring it down under 694 and put it into the lower part of our system. Second of all has been flood management or level management that Bert was talking about. And it'll become more critical, I think, as time goes on. We put in weirs and management items at Lake Phelan and Lake Keller. And this will help us manage the lower part of it. We just have to look at how we're going to manage the upper part of the watershed district. It is hard for us to explain to the citizens in the area that are part of the watershed district as to why West Vadnais is not in our watershed district. It's not that that's a big deal, but it's just something that we don't have a really good story to say. Why does it flow from one point into somebody else's lake and then down into another one? We have made a lot of investments. There's a lot of things that we put in to West Vadnais Lake because we need them in our process. We've done some cleanup of reeds. We've improved the flow patterns going south from West Vadnais Lake. We put a piezometer in there so that we know what the lake levels are. We've tested the interactivity between West Vadnais and East Vadnais Lake. So there's a lot of work that the Ramsey County is doing in there. And I am kind of interested to see what the plans are or what the feeling is from Vlamo about this particular lake. It is at the foot of the Vadnais Lake Association. It's in the middle of ours, and so that's kind of the issue that we're looking at. And what are your plans going forward? What are your feelings about the way that the lake is managed? The one thing that I did note, I was trying to find that report that you referenced about the Sustainable Lake Managed Report, and the link wouldn't work. So I went on the Vlamo website and looked for the report, and it's not there. It's been taken off. So I'm kind of wondering what that report says and what are the plans for West Vadnais going forward. So if other board members would like to say something before we turn it over to West Vadnais Lake Association, have at it.
I think you summarized at least my thoughts succinctly. I'm very interested to hear, especially since there's been communication between the two administration groups, just to hear their perspective. And maybe I too couldn't find the managed report. Thank you, Tina, for sending it to me. But I'd love to hear it. It's easier for me to understand if you talk through it.
Yeah, I apologize that the link that I put in there didn't work. It was trying to link to the PDF directly, and I should have just done it to the site. So it is still on their website, but the link, was not working. So I apologize for that. But Phil, maybe I'll have you jump in, and if you want to, or however you're planning to do that, but overview.
Yeah, I can give a real short share screen if that works for everybody.
Sure. Yep.
Let me know if you can see it.
Yep, you can see it.
All right. You don't see my speaker notes, you see the full page?
Yeah, just the page.
Cool. All right. So yeah, thanks for having us, everybody. Again, my name is Phil Belfiore, the administrator. I'm by no means meant to be just the spokesperson. We have two of our board members here. We do not have a quorum of our board here, just kind of for that point, but thank you very much for inviting us. And we're very excited about listening and understanding your perspectives on this request to Velamo, or possible request for boundary change to Velamo. Just a little bit of recent background from our perspective. Back in June of 2019, the board identified or talked about the EAW, the proposed outlet modification, which has subsequently happened. And then we were requested or the board at that time was requested to talk about the possible request from Ramsey-Washington on the boundary change back in those days. And then the board at that meeting identified a late July meeting to sit down with the group and talk about plans moving forward. Then the next month, to my understanding, there was a decision made that the Ramsey-Washington board decided not to pursue a joint meeting. And at that point, then staff was of the understanding, at Velamo's understanding at least, is that there was an understanding of joint management of West Vadnais. And so that's kind of how, in the last 2.5 years, that's how we've understood that the plan was joint management working together. So, and how to make the future joint management work. And so since that time, we've expanded and intensified that partnership program with Tina and the staff there. We've worked on cart management, and you can see some of those items that we've been working with Tina and Bill and others on staff to implement. Don Tanner, who's the program coordinator for that, is on the line here for specific technical questions on the work we've been doing since 2019 in that joint management approach. And then we've also been working on aquatic vegetation contour surveys on the lake, working with the SWCD, and then some dissolved oxygen monitoring as well, and with partnership. And then in 21, this last June, we adopted a 2022 budget, which was a 76% increase from the year before on the partnership joint management program for West Vadnais, including joint management with your staff on rough fish management, and just recently approving a fish survey and tagging with Carp Solutions as well at the last board meeting, where we're working with Shemek, like you are as well, on some of the work in West Vadnais. And then October, we did adopt that SLMR, like you referenced, which identifies in-lake potential opportunities for the future and in-lake management, and references that TMDL that's coming because the lake is impaired, and that TMDL is supposed to start in just a couple of years. And then more recently, Tina contacted us, fast forwarding to this year, November 21, that you guys had a discussion in October, and that you are interested in talking about potential boundary change discussion again, and requesting our attendance. And then we had a meeting of a full board where we talked about this as a formal agenda item in December, and they authorized the subcommittee to attend to listen and discuss. So that's what we're here today, to understand the perspectives of the Ramsey board. And then we had a subcommittee meeting a few weeks ago. The consensus at that subcommittee, who are in attendance tonight, was to keep an open mind. We're here to listen and understand. So they have not made any position about the potential of a request for boundary change. They want to keep an open mind and listen and understand your perspectives as well. And then they're interested in effective lake management. That's their interest, is what's the best approach for effective lake management, how to best serve the public. And they do have some initial first questions, as you probably do as well. And these are the three that the subcommittee would like to ask. The outcomes of what are the desired outcomes, mostly from a lake management perspective? Is there something that we're not understanding that we should be pursuing that we're currently not? Is there additional lake management elements that would be implemented with the boundary change? Is there an outcome here that is different than what's currently being pursued? Is that the purpose for the boundary change, or is there something else? You've kind of answered that, I think, at least it's partially. And then what's the benefits to the residents of the boundary change? And again, they're trying to understand and listen and really have an open mind about this from their perspective. So I didn't mean to take all the time here. I know some of the folks from Velamo here, the two or three, I'm not sure if Dan Jones entered the room yet, but may have some additional comments they'd like to make too.
Oh, this is Jim Linder. No, Phil, thanks. I think you hit pretty much all the things that at least I wanted to know. So yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Phil. I have nothing to add either. I'm just here to listen and to find out all the details best I can. Phil, you did a great job. We had all got together and put these questions together, and I think it's pretty straightforward.
Okay, Diane, did you have any comments? Where'd you go? There you are.
Cliff's got his hand up.
Oh, Cliff, sorry.
Just from my perspective, and I think issues we've talked about in the past in our board, as we included the Grass Lake WMO into our district, and we started to have the wet period of precipitation in the previous 5 years, and we had internal flooding issues, and discussed what could be done to reduce those water levels. Obviously, the issue of the outlet is through West Vadnais Lake, and some of the improvements we identified were to expand the outlet of West Vadnais, improve the capacity of our pipe that goes under 694, and then obviously the flooding of Twin Lake and all that came about, and the discussion was, well, how come West Vadnais isn't in our district? And then, you know, it was a logical question. The West Vadnais receives water from our district and discharges water into our district, and it actually is within the physical watershed of Ramsey-Washington. My contribution to that discussion was basically that those situations happen around borders of watershed districts, that we have parcels that flow into our district that aren't in our district, and we collaborate with adjacent watersheds to just make sure that the management is appropriate and collaborate with them and or get them to agree that we can do certain improvements if needed. So I wasn't a real big proponent of aggressively pursuing a boundary change unless, like you said, Phil, unless there was a specific purpose that we wanted accomplished that couldn't be accomplished through collaboration. The only issue is, I think that West Vadnais is a lake. It's a pretty big resource, and it's a pretty obvious resource that isn't in our district. And I think the logical question is, why isn't it? And so I don't think really so far we would have accomplished anything in addition to what we've already accomplished. And I think from my perspective, Vadnais Lake actually addressing the TMDL is a benefit to us, even though we aren't spending the money and it's needed to be done, and you are pursuing it. So I think from water quality's perspective, you're addressing what needs to be done from that standpoint. We've been able to work with you on lake level reduction, the outlet of the lake. Those are the major things that we identified that needed to be done, and they've been accomplished. So I think I don't see a lot of purpose anymore to really annexing it, but unless it's just strictly the obvious physical issue of it's a lake and it's flowing into our district, and yet it's not in our district, and from that standpoint, it maybe should be, but I haven't been pushing for it, but we can discuss that.
I've had some questions because, like Cliff said, it's not logical. And also because the Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District has spent some money on it, a fair amount of money, and some things we've shared, but not everything. And it just doesn't make sense to me. It's not a huge deal, but instead of answering your questions, I'm interested in why you want to keep it.
Well, from a standpoint of Vadnais Heights, it's for development. It's one less hoop to jump through. You know, one less approval that we need to have. But other than that, I'm just here to listen. I'm just here trying to find out why we're doing this.
Yeah, and I don't have any more to add to it other than again, what makes the most sense, and you know, how have we interacted with through our partnerships, and moving forward, what all what are the burdens going to be on Velamo if we continue to manage this lake, and again, that's something that we will, after this meeting, discuss as a subcommittee, and then report back to our full board, which meets next in late April.
Yeah, and I should mention one more thing. This board has been very concerned about maintenance because of the increase in precipitation, and the recent maintenance things have been done by our board. So take back to your board some of the information that we're building on maintenance schedules and evaluations. And I'd like to know if they are going to have some similar kind of maintenance schedule or commitment that will help us get the water flowing from the top end down through West Vadnais into our lower end of the water flow, because we've done some infrastructure changes, but also it has needed quite a bit of maintenance and probably will continue to.
Is it possible for you to, for Ramsey-Washington to put together some type of informational sheet saying what you've done and what's some of the costs have been, and what are some of the things that are going to be coming up on the horizon? Again, that'll be, I think, information that we can share with our board that will help clarify what's been done, what needs to be done, and as we look at building our future budgets, what might some of these things be costing us that we would need to do, and or how best to share costs and or to identify what they are and who's going to be taking the lead on them.
Yeah, I definitely could put together a map with showing some of our locations of where some of this work is done and where our future maintenance needs will be. Most of that is in our district. There's a few items, in West, there's one area in West Vadnais itself that we did do some cattail and reed clean out a couple years.
On the north side of the lake, you did a little bit?
Yeah, in the northwest along Rice Street, yeah.
Is that to kind of make sure the flows under the that are coming under the street there are not inhibited?
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Yeah, and that was at the towards the peak of the flooding when Rice Street was closed too, or it was threatening to be closed right in that time frame. So we did go in and do that work, and we also have the twin pipes that are under West Vadnais or under Vadnais Boulevard as well that we put in to allow better drainage from West Vadnais to the south into our district, and that what we call the Triangle Wetland, which is just south of Vadnais Boulevard. So there would be maintenance needs around those pipes as well. But yes, I can definitely put together some more information that you can bring back to your full board on that as well.
I have a couple of technical questions for maybe staff or maybe Brad. I'm not sure if that's okay, Tina, or President Swoop, is that okay? Because I think that would be helpful for me in the future board meeting. And one is in your memo, Tina, you talk about the connection between the two lakes. Is there certainty that there's no hydraulic connection? You used the word function fairly separately. So is there hydrologic connection between these two lakes? Because I still have not seen the study that kind of conclusively says there's not water flowing between the two. Because of course, I think that would be a big technical element for Velamo to understand.
Yeah, that's between West and East Vadnais Lake. Brad, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'd have to go back to look at the specifics, Phil. But from our discussion that we had internally last month, talking about this, there's a minimal connection that we found from the analysis that we did. This has been several years ago, so it's very minimal. We would never say there's no connection, but there were soil borings done in that essentially a berm between the two lakes. We did a bit of groundwater modeling and looked at some different scenarios just to see, how that might respond, and it clearly was a minimal connection.
Okay. And there's no potential for overflow even at highest elevations of either lake?
No.
Okay. And then this overflow bypass system is what you called it in your memo. Where is that? Is that going out of the basin, or is that disconnecting various things, what I'll call within the larger basin when the water is high?
So when go ahead, Tina.
No, you can go ahead, Brad.
Okay. So in the Triangle Wetland, that in that area on the east side of that, as a part of the work we did a couple of years ago, we created a defined overflow swale that worked its way to a low point that is at a pipe that ultimately drains to Twin Lake. But if that were to overflow, we have a pumping system, a portable pumping system that we would bring in to grab that flow and actually pump it around Twin Lake. There's a pipe that is just sitting along the noise wall that we would connect to pump around to a MnDOT pond, which would route it through the freeway. So when we say bypass, it would utilize the existing outlet, and then if we needed more capacity, we would use this pumping system. There are limits to that, obviously. I mean, if we have a very extreme event, it would exceed the pumping system, and that would flow through the Twin Lake system. But now with an outlet essentially in the far end of Twin Lake, that would find its way out too. So we would have those properties around Twin Lake being far less susceptible to the flooding that they had back 3 years ago.
So does water during like really high seasonal floods, like in 17, 18, 19 area, does the whole thing kind of act as one big basin? Meaning like, because my understanding is even it tailwaters all the way back to Rice Street from the outlet, from the restricted outlet that you have. So the restricted outlet causes tailwater to and it even flows the opposite direction. So I guess the reason I'm asking is during some high water events and or high seasons or both, it sounds like in some ways this watershed connection is interconnected, meaning the high water in Ramsey-Washington on both sides coming in and coming out is at the same elevation as the water in Velamo, because it's all one big basin at some point, because there's really a very minimal outlet. And
Yes,
so I think that's
correct.
important, because it sounds like both during potentially like snow melt events or high water events, as well as seasonally high water annual situations like we had for those 2 years, the watershed divides actually don't change the high water elevation. The high water elevation on the upstream side in your district, on in the lake that's currently in Velamo, and downstream in Triangle Wetland and Twin Lake are all the same elevation. They're becoming one big bathtub.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very flat through there.
And so one big bathtub is important, I think, for us to understand that technically, because really what that's telling me is that there may be years where there is no Velamo and Ramsey-Washington. There's this one big bathtub that has to be managed by somebody. And that to me is an important factor in looking at it from a technical standpoint, especially because if this is both about water quality and water quantity, which it sounds like it's both, so it's a complicated hydrologic system with the 4 CFS coming out, which is really a very small amount for the size of the watershed. It's almost insignificant.
But I don't think water from Velamo ever really mixes with water in Ramsey-Washington. that berm between Vadnais Lake and West Vadnais Lake is not, it's not overtopped. And the collection system for the regional water system doesn't overflow into our district. So I don't think there is a combination. They are basically at the same level, but their flows are distinctly different.
Between east and west, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
I
no,
think,
I'm not
Phil,
talking
what
about
you were
east and west.
talking
I'm
about,
talking
though-
about as the water flows through west, the system of the West Vadnais outlet creates one big bathtub.
With grass,
With
lake,
grass.
and yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to, not
Okay.
not the east and west
Okay.
situation. I understood that there was no overflow potential between those two. I'm saying the question at hand is, you know, really the technical hydraulics is one where, as I understand it, during critical storm events, there is no demarcation between the two boundaries. It becomes one big bathtub that actually goes, you know, and it's mostly because of the drainage and the outlet, which are both in Ramsey-Washington Metro.
One,
You know,
I wanted to because that's in the notes that I wrote down. When you look at normal condition years, you look at years where we're acting within a certain set of bounds. The relationship that has been successful is the current relationship there is. But the test of a system, in my opinion, isn't so much that normal condition. It's those edge cases where you have those big inflows that really put the stress on the system. And in those particular cases, it seems beneficial, especially in this particular instance, to do quick, decisive action, or to have quick, decisive action. And the less number of administrators or governing bodies involved in the conversation could enable us to take faster, more immediate action. Which is why I know that this is just a conversation, and I think things have been very successful in the past, but that's what really speaks to me is we're not, we're kind of in a unique dry time right now, right? Like, what's the push to do it? Well, the push to do it is in these dry times, you can account for those weird in cases that really do test our system. And that's really something that I feel strongly about.
Agreed, and that's kind of where I'm coming from too. We're, as a watershed district, we're getting more into management of flood situations. We've done a lot of work downstream. We still have some things to do upstream with the Wabasso, Grass Lake. At some point, we're going to be in a position where we can, almost like playing a pipe organ, look at how we balance things as rainfall is going. It's not going to be uniform. We can take things up and down. These aren't in effect yet. I'm just sort of speculating where we're going, given what we're doing. But to not have part of the flow stream, as Val said, under the control where we can react quickly, could be a deficit from our point of view. It could be an issue. We've talked about ways that we can get water faster through 694. Not doing anything in that area quite yet, although Brad talked about some bypass pumping that we're going to be doing. So we're busy trying to manage a dynamic system, and part of that system isn't even ours. We can't manage it. And it's not that you're being uncooperative. That's not the point. The point is that if we need something done and it requires approval, then we have to go to somebody else and ask for approval. And that's kind of why we're having this discussion and why we're looking into this, is because it's a matter of reactivity when things are when things are stressful. At one point, when I took over as president, Brad asked me what was my biggest fear. I told him my biggest fear was that when things are good, we're going to stop working on things that we need when they're bad. And this is one of the things that we're now, as a watershed, engaging in looking at a lot of flood control things that we have. And from my point of view, this would be one of the essential elements that we should have in our portfolio to be able to manage the whole system. Cliff.
One other point in favor of Velamo, I guess, allowing us to annex West Vadnais would be that there are very few parcels that are private land, and they're all developed at this point. So I don't think you're losing tax base, and I don't think those properties would be terribly stressed by being managed under our district other than yours. The rest of the entire area, other than the west side of the lake, is entirely wetland or lake. So I don't think the impact would be very dramatic. I think if Ramsey-Washington took over that area, we'd be absorbing a lot of cost and having to complete the TMDL and do water quality management. So that's something we should consider, but I don't know if it's a argument against it or not, but it's just a factor.
Yeah, there are only, because I looked, there are 5 to 7 houses along Rice Street that are in Lamo. When you go across the street, it's Washington. It's our watershed district right across the street. So those are the only houses, I think, because everything else is public land.
Yeah, we just did a high level, we counted 45 that would potentially be in question. Parcels now, not residential, not residents addresses.
There are a couple of commercial properties.
Parcels, yeah. It seems like I'm hearing mostly, I know that, we've been focusing for the last 3 years quite a bit in increasing our capacity and partnership on the in-lake water quality, because obviously that's what we can control and manage, given we don't really have a watershed that serves the lake at all for the most part, very small percentage. So we've been focusing on in-lake partnership and management and increasing that every year. It seems like most of the interest that I'm hearing is not on that side of things. It's on the water, what I'll say the water quantity side, rather than the water quality side, from at least what I'm hearing tonight, which is interesting for us, I think, to know.
It's actually both, and both have been a driver, because we've been doing so much work on water quality upstream from that and downstream, and it's the water quality is not good, and it just gets sucked down into the rest of the district. And we've known this for a long time and have started doing some things with it. And I understand there's plans for the future, but it's been a problem for a long time and goes through the whole rest of the district. So whenever the subject comes up, it's always both quality and quantity that are issues.
I have a question regarding your other lakes, Twin Lakes, Grass Lake. Are those impaired per the DNR, or is it just West Vadnais that's impaired?
In that system, West Vadnais is the only one that's impaired.
Okay.
Yeah. Grass Lake's actually a wetland system, not a lake. And then Twin Lake is not impaired.
And I wanted to second what Diane said. I think in priority, I like Larry's Oregon analysis. We're trying to create preventative, proactive conveyance mechanisms, and it would be really beneficial to find ways of doing that on this particular water body as well. But in years where there aren't issue, quality is still an important focal point. It's just, you don't need to instantly react to the quality piece like a conveyance issue if it arises.
Hi, Dawn Tanner here. Just as someone who's been working really closely with Ramsey-Washington staff on the West Vadnais partnership, I want to say how much we appreciate working with you. And We also recognize that what we've done so far is a fairly small contribution to the overall CARP work and a lot of the issues that are at hand. And we really appreciate all the work that you've been doing. We kind of see what we've been doing in perspective as well.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah, we've kind of been in the position where our position is we can't just not let it happen because it's not our lake. We have to make the investments and do the things that need to be done. And thank you for acknowledging that. There's been a lot of work that Brad and Tina and Dave and the team have done, and Bill have done to help manage the situation as well as we can under the circumstances.
Well, and also to be clear, I mean, it does sound like we're still going to have to partner. I don't think that goes away, right?
No.
Like, I just want to be really clear to that.
No, it doesn't go away, but I think the point is that we can make all those decisions at this point if we have the lake. We don't have to be transferring decisions to somebody else. It's kind of the reason for exploring this. This is where we're at with this.
Yeah, I'm in full support, Larry. I just, when Don spoke, it made it feel like the partnership was somewhat terminating. And I was like, no,
Yeah,
no,
right.
I don't want that to be true.
No, I don't mean that at all. Just, we know that even with the CARP project, our piece of that is a pretty small financial contribution to the whole CARP project of that system that you're working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you, board chairs, or excuse me, President. The other question on the kind of the water quality side is that I wonder about or wanted to ask about is, or what I think about a little bit when this issue is, this would be a fairly unique TMDL to write as well, because I'm assuming there's going to be a significant waste load allocation coming in to the lake. And then there may also be an internal load component as well. I don't know what the weight of each would be as far as the magnitude and how much resources would have to go into it. But there would have to be some fairly complex agreements, I guess, probably I don't know how it would be done exactly, to be honest with you. I think it'd be based on a lot on the science, which we don't know yet, because that's what the TMDL would tell us, and orders of priority based on that. But there would have to be some unique agreements and such, obviously, because what we would do would affect the situation with the TMDL on the one end and vice versa. So it'd be another thing to think about, I guess, going forward.
So any other comments before I really appreciate the discussion. This has been one of the better discussions we've ever had, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And Tina, you're going to put together a little overview of what we've done in West Vadnais Lake so that we can present it to their board at the end of April, I believe.
Yep, I can get that to them, as well as that report for the West Vadnais and East Vadnais connection study too, so you can see that as well.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of work done over and above the connectivity, because we were looking at, could we pump water? We were actually trying to figure out how to get water out of West Vadnais Lake, and for example, put it in Sucker Lake, or we put it into East Vadnais Lake. It was all you, and I'm glad we didn't do it. That is St. Paul's drinking water down there. But there was a lot of work. Bar in the watershed did a lot of work, probably 2018, 2019, someplace.
Yep.
So those reports are there, and that could help look at what's been done, what the thought process was behind it, and would there be any effect on the rest of Lamo from taking West Vadnais out of your system?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you for the invitation, President and Board of Managers. I really learned a lot, and I really appreciate the insights. So thanks again for having us.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not saying that things aren't going well. That's not it. We're just saying that we want to take a look at maybe another way of managing this and having this within our purvey. It's not like you're not doing a good job of cooperating. It's just that it may be, from our point of view, it would be more efficient and effective if we had that lake and could manage that as part of our overall system.
Well, we appreciate the partnership.
Yep, so do we.
Well, thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you spending the time with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great
I
evening. Again, thank you for the invitation.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, you guys.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Yep. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Now we move on to item number permit program. We've approved all the permits up in the consent agenda. Nicole, anywhere else? I see you had wetland training.
Yep, I attended a couple wetland talks. It was also kind of exciting because it was my first in-person conference since the start of the pandemic. And it was an international one hosted in Minneapolis. And me and Mary and Paige and Matt all got to attend. So that was kind of fun and crazy to see people in person. Good speakers. I don't know, Paige, Mary, if you had anything to add, but I thought the presentations were really well done. I only attended one day of the conference, but it was cool to have an international audience. Like there were people from Australia and Argentina. Like people came a long way to be in Minneapolis in February. So that's very impressive.
I think one thing I would add that I noted at the conference is that Minnesota seems to be far ahead from other states and countries for erosion and sediment control. So just kind of fun to see how much progress our state has made and how many things we're already doing that are brand new to other regions. So that was cool to see.
Yeah, and I should mention it was the International Erosion Control Association Conference, IECA. And Paige helped with planning of it, I believe.
Yeah, the hardest part was they wanted to do, usually this conference is somewhere really nice and warm, like it's been in San Diego and Atlanta. So when we were planning, they wanted to have all these field tours and construction site tours, and it was really hard to make them understand that we don't have a lot going on right now. But they did a tour of St. Anthony Falls Lab. They went ice fishing one day. I didn't attend that, but there was a lot of people from the Southeast United States who had never been on frozen lake before. So they had a good time. They didn't catch any fish, but they still had a good time.
Still experience, yeah. You got it once, at least. One other thing on 2121, the 3M thing. I think that, not that it's going to be, but if it's in the meeting minutes, it says building 201. I think they're tearing down 209 rather than 201. Hopefully. Is that right?
I don't know. I'll check.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's been a lot of 3M building 3020 whatever. So I can definitely double check that number.
Yeah. Just when it goes into the meeting minutes, just want to make sure that that's the right number.
Sure. Yeah, and Mary's been kind of ramping up site checks. As you're all probably painfully aware, this has been a very cold winter with very few days above freezing. But now that we're starting to get some warmer days, site inspections or site, drive-bys even are ramping up, and we've had some requests for pre-construction meetings. So there's people itching to start projects already. So I don't know, Mary, if you wanted to add anything since you're here, we get to see you.
Yeah, lately I've just been making the rounds, mostly checking for sediment tracking as it's super muddy and people are mobilizing heavy equipment. So making lots of rounds around the district to make sure sediment tracking's under control and being swept up. And yeah, like Nicole said, full inspections of sites are starting to resume now. Now that they're more accessible with all that snow melt, but I should be back to bi-weekly inspections pretty soon here. It seems like spring is almost here, so.
I have a question for you, Nicole, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Could you say more about the BMP cost benefit spreadsheet? That caught my eye. Was that something new and I just, or is it something that's old and I just missed it before?
Yeah, that's actually something that Mary works on annually, but it's essentially tracking all of our permit and stewardship grant volume reduction practices. And it goes into TMDL reporting, MS4 requirements. So we're essentially tracking, amongst other things, like pollutants removed, volumes that are being captured. Yeah, but it's using like specific calculations, and I know it's a time-consuming effort for Mary. We had Brandon and some other folks from BAR help this year because there were so many BMPs, particularly with the Gold Line project that got approved. So they were helping us track some of those numbers because it's a very arduous process. I don't know, Mary, I don't have as much experience or any really with that spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's been a spreadsheet that's been annually updated since, I mean, it has all the BMPs since like the 90s. And so it has permit, targeted retrofit, capital improvement projects, and basically any BMPs throughout our district. So they're categorized by their sub-watershed, and impaired waters are categorized for TMDL reporting. So yeah, I update that annually in the winter when it's a little slower in the office. I do a lot of office work with that. Run all the BMPs through the MIDS calculator, which, like Nicole was saying, will spit out the TSS removal, TP removal, and volume reduction of each BMP. So it's kind of fun to be able to play with those numbers, to see what different results we have in sub-watersheds and the watershed as a whole.
And actually, you'll see the results of that are in the project status report under the targeted retrofits. I believe there's some graphs in there that show cost benefit of different types of BMPs over time. And so that's some of the ways that we use that information, that data.
My curiosity, what piqued my curiosity was, is there a way to help educate people the benefit being brought forward just as a means to increase exposure and understanding of the community? Like a lot of this data is important for tracking, is what I think I gathered from some of this, but I think it's pretty powerful to show that this is a way demonstrating we're helping clean up bodies of water. I know it's hard,
Yeah.
it's pretty detailed, but I bet you a pretty graph and then a nice headline would really help educate constituents on what's happening. That's just that was my thought.
We definitely use that data in that way over
Okay.
time. At different points in time, we'll grab it and use that as an education piece. We also use that information in our annual report, which does include some nice graphs and stuff too. So yeah.
Okay. I apologize. Thank you.
Very valuable information for sure. So we appreciate Mary's time getting that all situated each year.
That's all I have, unless there are other questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item number 8, the stewardship grant program. Still have money left in the fund, although.
Yeah, there's money. There's not $7 million left though. I realize I forgot to delete one number. So there is $573,635 left. So yeah, some big projects coming through, which is exciting. Thanks for approving those tonight. I did want to let you guys know that we have the final plans for the Lake Owasso shoreline restorations are in the hands of all the homeowners. There are only 10, which we were hoping for a few more, but the people who are going forward are pretty excited. And we just did outreach to a small area this time, but excited to have those go through. So we're hoping we get all of their approvals and final plans done to bring those to you at the next board meeting so that we can issue those to go out for bid.
Were you able to work with Andy Walls on getting that?
Yeah, so he went through the cost share program a few years ago. So he's kind of helped with some outreach and yeah, put some more people in touch with us. And I think he did a next door post, and hopefully he'll be more involved going forward.
Okay. Good, thank you. Okay. Item number 9. Board of Managers Annual Meeting. I think we call this to order officially, the annual meeting. And Tina, can you take the reins on this, or do you want?
Sure. Nope, I can definitely walk us through the different items in here. As is laid out in the action item, the first thing I have there is election of officers. We have 4 positions that are filled. We have president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. The current officers, Larry's the president, vice president is Cliff, Diane's the treasurer, and Pam is the secretary. There are 4 of you here tonight, and one of them is leaving, I guess. So we have 3 of you. You certainly can, I think, appoint Pam to any of the positions as well as part of your motion. I don't know, Tracy, unless I'm wrong, I don't think she actually has to be here to be appointed, elected. Does she have to accept a nomination?
No.
Typically, that's how you get on committees. Right?
No, you're correct, Tina.
Not being there.
Yeah, always show up.
Yeah.
I would assume we could appoint Pam to her current position as secretary and be safe.
Yeah.
Continue in that position.
Yeah, I think so too. Typically you wouldn't, a new member coming in wouldn't necessarily there would be a member only and not one of the 4 positions. So I think, the 4 of you that are left after Cliff leaves could fill those positions and then leave the new person to be a member.
And
so
I will bow out of nominating anybody. So the rest of you proceed.
So what we'll need is a nomination and a second. We can do them one at a time, or probably would be easiest, but.
Do we need a second, Tracy?
Pardon?
Do we need a second of a nomination? I thought the last time we went through this.
Yeah, you put me to the test last time, so I'm hoping this time is a lot easier. But I think you can make a nomination. Actually, I don't think you need to have a second on the nomination.
Okay.
Okay.
Then let's not do that.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll nominate Larry for president.
Great. Is there any other nominations?
Nominations.
I'll just ask.
Okay, I guess we vote on that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll call roll call on that. Val?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
Cliff?
Aye.
And Larry?
Aye, I guess.
You sure can.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Jeez, it's not as exciting as the last time, but okay. Vice President, I would nominate Diane for that position.
Great.
Any discussion?
Or any other nominations?
Okay.
Okay.
Roll.
Okay. Cliff?
Aye.
Val?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
And Larry?
Aye. Okay, that leaves treasurer for Make Val for treasurer.
We nominate Val for treasurer and Pam for secretary.
Okay.
Val, do you accept that nomination?
I do.
You do?
Perfect. Good. I guess I didn't ask Diane if she accepted her nominations.
That's good.
She wasn't given a choice.
Yeah, right.
Good choice.
All right. Cliff,
Aye.
Val,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
and Larry.
Aye.
Awesome.
Okay, awesome. We got that. Now we move on to.
May I ask a quick question, Larry?
Sure.
Tactically, if Cliff's role isn't backfilled, does the quorum laws change? Is it 2 or is it still 3? Okay,
Still 3.
Just wanted to, I was trying to work it out in my head and which way
Yeah.
it fell. Just wanted to check. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's still 3. And I do anticipate that we'll have a new board member at the April meeting. So yeah, I think we should be good. But yes, it is still 3.
Right. Right. And as I understand it from what happened with Pam with Washington County, that until they appoint somebody, unless Cliff actually resigns, he's still the board member up until that point.
Yeah. Yep. Basically, they're considered active members until there's a replacement. Yeah.
But for the next meeting, I do anticipate being out of state, so I doubt I would be here.
You gotta have a cell phone. We'll get you.
I do. I did attend a meeting from the Catskills, so I suppose it could be.
I know. I was going to say that.
You can never leave.
We'll get to that later. Okay. Number 2 is consulting staff selection.
Yes, so this is, so every 2 years, we're required to actually notice the solicitation of consultants for our engineer, attorney, and accountant. So that was done, that was in the Pioneer Press, I believe 2 weeks in a row, as was required. We did only receive proposals from our existing consultant staff, and those were included in the packet for your review and information. Brad, Tracy are here if you have any questions or comments about any of their information that they submitted. Redpath's not here, but I certainly could pass along any questions or comments if you have for them as well.
I just had one question for Tracy. I noticed that you had Susanna on the list of people that could attend.
Yeah, we all do, the 3 of us do watershed district work. So if ever some reason one of us couldn't attend, we wanted to make sure you're aware that we do have another attorney that does that. And she's the primary attorney for those other 2 watershed districts. So we don't anticipate she'll be part of a normal rotation, but we do want you to realize that it really is kind of a staff-wide, 3 attorneys that can back us up if something needs to be done where Lauren and I would have a conflict.
Okay. All right, that was the only question I had. Anybody else have any questions about this? So do we have a motion to accept the 3 staff assignments of Bar Engineering for the engineering, Gallowitz Olson for attorney, and Redpath and Company for the accountant?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? Tina, call the roll.
Okay, Cliff?
Aye.
Val?
Aye.
Diane?
Aye.
And Larry?
Aye. Congratulations.
Thank you. I suppose I could offer now that you could have moved us to a breakout room, but it's a little late. But thank you. It's an honor to serve all of you. Thank you for that.
You can go. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, Larry, I guess I would like to comment as well. We put a lot of pictures in our proposal because there's just a huge team back at Bar that gets involved with district projects. And I will say, out of the many clients that Bar has, the people in water resources that work on Ramsey-Washington projects are always very excited to work on very cool projects, water quality, water quantity, natural resources projects. They always look forward to it. So I appreciate the opportunity to continue to serve. So thank you very much.
Now, you've been a long time with Ramsey-Washington, so we're happy to have you. Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so we also have the official designations of the Bank of Deposit and the official newspaper. Bank of Deposit would be the 4M Fund with the League of Minnesota Cities, US Bank, and the official newspaper again is the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Do I have a motion to accept those two official designations?
I'll move to accept those. The official bank being the US Bank and newspaper St. Paul Pioneer Press.
Second. Okay, any discussion?
I did have a follow-on question. I recall, and I was only like a few days into the position when we had talked about some of this stuff earlier, so I'm still coming to speed on this particular process. But on we had brought up the need for maybe moving to both a physical paper, but also maybe a digital type of solution. Is that something that needs to come up as part of this process, or is that something that we should visit on a later date, just out of curiosity?
Are you talking about the newspaper?
Yeah, the newspaper. Forgive me. Yeah, like the newspaper. I think if I'm recalling the conversation, it's good to do. It's necessary to do, but keeping up with modern times, is there another digital platform that we should also consider?
Yeah, it's actually required of us under statute to do, and Tracy, you can speak to it. It's the statute itself is archaic, and it's what it requires. You can speak, Tracy.
Yeah, no, so Val, we are required to have this written word. I mean, it is archaic, but I don't think anything stops the district from trying to find other outlets that actually would reach people more and supplement it. So we're required to keep it this way. But if we think, we want to get actual notice to people, that we don't have to designate it as an official newspaper or something, but we could also do that to supplement the notice provisions.
Okay. That's what I wanted to tease around, is it's the minimum requirements. I just wanted to understand. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and as a matter of practice, we do post all the notices on our website as well. So they're located there under a news section as well.
And as far as the public bidding process, we use a different electronic website where contractors frequently go to find proposal opportunities for them. So it not only gets posted in the official newspaper, but it goes directly to where the contractors are looking to bid on work that the district has.
I love this meeting because I always learn something new. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will close our annual Board of Managers meeting and move on to item number 10, which is the attorney's report.
We had somewhat a quiet month. I know Lauren was involved in reviewing a stormwater maintenance agreement, and I think she helped wordsmith a little bit, but it was otherwise a solid, good agreement, right, Nicole? And otherwise, really, we weren't called on much this month, which is always good for the financial piece, right?
Yeah.
That was good because Tracy lost her voice last month, so.
That is for sure, for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Didn't stop me from talking, but I could not be. That was bad.
Man. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 11, board issues, policies, and operations. Okay, the first thing is future meetings, which also comes up in the administrator's report. But Tina, you're recommending that we go back to in-person meetings, hybrid meetings for the April meeting. And
yeah, I think that would make Tracy more comfortable too in our and how we're moving forward. But I think it's time, especially if we're moving towards, bringing the staff back on on a more consistent basis. I think for sure having the board as much in person as we can. I did write that in my administrator's report that, you know, there is an option for board members to not be in person, but the notice requirements are, you know, there are notice requirements that are required for that. So I think, you know, we tested that hybrid method in August. I think it worked fairly well. The thing I added in my report was that each board member have a device so that your faces could be seen. You could log into the meeting individually, so your faces could be seen up close. We would still do the sound through the district sound system that would then go to the computer that would be broadcasting on the Zoom, but that you would have the audience that was participating remotely, like our residents, would be able to see your faces up close.
So in other words, we'd bring our own computers and do like we're doing now, but we'd just be in the room and our picture would be being taken and part of the Zoom.
Right. Yeah. Because I would still like to record our meetings to be able to post them to YouTube and have, you know, then we can use your pictures. Like I said, the sound system will be, but we couldn't all have our computer sounds on at the same time. There would be too much feedback. So we'll have all that turned off and we'll just use our sound system at our office. But the visual, at least, that would be recorded and placed on YouTube, you'd be able to see your faces, but you wouldn't have to look at your camera when you're talking. You can look at the people instead. But
Tina, if I understand correctly, you were also suggesting that staff appear by Zoom and consultants unless they wanted to be in person for presentation.
Yeah, that is what I'm proposing for now, at least in our transition times as we're figuring this all out. To minimize the number of people.
A lot of sense. So the way you laid it out, I'm fully in support of.
Okay, great.
What
I'm just
about
sad that I missed it. I'm sad that I'll miss the in-person meetings.
Yeah. I know.
You're welcome to come to anyone you want. If you swing back through town, stop and see us. We'll be.
I may do that.
Yeah. What about wearing masks? Where do we stand with that? Are we going to have to wear masks? Because it's awkward if we're sitting there wearing masks and nobody else is wearing a mask.
Yeah, interestingly enough, when I wrote the board packet up, CDC guidance was recommending masks indoors. And then on Friday afternoon, they changed their guidance. So actually right now their guidance, because numbers are low in our area, they say we could be without masks indoors. So that the way I was planning to propose is that we would say masks recommended, but not required under that circumstance. So certainly if you would feel more comfortable wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, that would be a personal choice in that case. We'll also have very few people in the room so we can spread out and manage the risk that way too, if you're concerned about that.
Okay. Will the cameras be able to get the whole table noise?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Because really, Val was in the meeting with us when we did it, and it worked a whole lot better than I thought it was going to work, actually.
Yeah, I thought so too.
I'm comfortable with it. I would be very uncomfortable, and I will not wear a mask when I'm in the meeting, so just so you know. The other question is, does anybody on the board have a feeling for how many meetings, or is there guidance on how many meetings a board member can attend remotely versus having to be in person?
Yes, Tracy, the statute does have a number, doesn't it, for number in a year?
Yeah, and I am sorry, I don't know that, Larry. I will look it up to see. I thought the way Tina presented the whole plan seemed really good and really consistent and didn't violate any of the statutes as they're laid out now. But I'm not aware of that specific number, so I will look at that, Larry, and make sure that Tina and I talk about that.
Yeah, I know the Maud was looking at like a number like 3. And I don't know if there's anything in the statutes as they're currently evolving that has to do with that. But that's something we need to take a look at, just so we know what the rules and regulations are when we walk into the room, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Lauren's kind of spearheaded that, so I might just ask her tomorrow morning, but we will certainly, that's our responsibility. We'll give you that guidance.
Yeah, we'll get that out as well as what the notice requirements will be if one of you were to attend remotely and not in person. Basically, it says you have to notice you're a public place where you're hosting the meeting at. So,
right. And it's evolving. I don't know. The legislature could stick their nose into it and decide.
I would hope we could practice some flexibility, however, because if somebody, for example, had a extremely vulnerable child at home and not wanting to be potentially exposed and bring it home, I think we should understand that that person wants some extra protection. They didn't choose to have this pandemic during their appointment, so I don't know. I would think that we should allow people to still stay remote if they choose to do that. But
well, that's where we need some guidance from Tracy and Laura Ann.
Yep.
See what we have to do versus what we may want to do. So that's a good point. But we're going to have some guidelines we have to work under, I'm pretty sure.
and I'm really considering the next several months as transitioning into this next phase, I guess. And just like Cliff was saying with staff, I know it's different with open meeting law requirements, but with staff, same thing. I want to make sure that I'm being responsive to staff that have concerns about being in person and with or without mask and there's so many factors that go into each individual's needs. So we're working through all that, but I would want the same thing for the board is basically what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. Well, at this point, we'll plan on that. With COVID, you can never tell. That is a month away. What's going to happen in the meantime? But,
never know.
Yeah, that's where we'll go from now. And we'll probably ease back into it at a certain point and kind of rely on you, Tina, to determine who needs to be in the room besides the board members.
It'll be nice for everybody to really appreciate the new boardroom.
Yeah, right. New chairs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. I met with one of the staff people there a couple weeks ago. It was very nice.
Yeah. Well, Val and I got to experience it when we had our brief meeting.
Yeah, right.
That was it. Yeah. Okay. All right. And then the administrator review. They have to figure out what we're going to do about Tina's review. So Tina gets paid, among other things, and gets rated. Where do we stand with that? I know that the doodle was incomplete. Are we going to try another doodle? All the dates are gone, so that isn't it.
Right. Yeah. If I guess the question is there a better way to compare calendars so that we can nail down a date that can work for everybody?
Is there a problem with just saying next board meeting hour before to do it as opposed to providing the flexibility? Not to be dictatorial, it just seems like if it's all isolated to an afternoon, that typically works better. It's harder to find other times.
Yeah, it all depends on whether people can make it to the board meeting an hour early. That has been a problem for some board members, not a problem for me. I don't have anything to do. Yeah, that is probably the easiest, but it's a closed meeting. And I think we did that once, didn't we? Have the Cliff was doing it.
Yeah.
We have the closed meeting ahead of the regular board meeting. Close the doors, had a meeting, and that was that.
Yeah, it works. That works fine. We'll be in person too. I mean, it'll be nice to see your faces in person for that as well. But
Right. But the only problem is, where'd our new vice president go? There's our new vice president. Cliff, have you completed the review process? Because there's a lot of paperwork that you did. I know.
No, but I could, if we, Tina and I could meet the first half of this month and I could do that and provide a memo. Maybe Diane would want to come too.
yeah, we could do it with Diane as well. Mhm.
Yeah, I was gonna wait till later in the meeting, the manager stuff, but I do need to spend a bit of time with Cliff. He's got an awful lot of responsibilities that he's handled as vice president. I need to get caught up, but yes, I can do that. I'm not back until the night of the 14th and busy on the 15th. So in person would have to be after that, but I can always zoom in too. So
we could Zoom for that.
Work.
Yeah.
I think that'll work. Let's try to do it for someplace between the 16th and 20th or something like that. And
sure.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll figure it out. And Tina, I think the doodle poll is fine. I think we just have to put a deadline on it. And if you get 3 people on a night or whenever and other people didn't answer, then we'll just hope they can come.
Yeah, that sounds good. Do we want to?
My bias stuff might with like kids' activities after school. It really is for me just Wednesday. That's just
Wednesday works because they don't have activities.
I will make Wednesday work. Yes.
Yeah. So if we want to try before, so I'll meet with Cliff and Diane later this month, and then do we want to do the closed meeting right before the board meeting?
Yep, that'd be fine.
In April. Okay. Let's plan for that.
Everybody's agreed with it. Okay. Let's okay, that'll get that going. Then we have, I've got the West Fadness Lake on here. It's just, are there any other comments that anybody has? We had a good session, I thought, with them, and it looks like they're going to go back and discuss it with their board. We made way more progress than I thought we were going to.
Oh, guess Pam is in the waiting room. Hold on.
Any other?
I did want to say thank you, Tina, for all the prep work, and I know that's having these types of conversations are important, they're meaningful, but they take a lot of work. So I did want to definitely say thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's been a deal. But any other thoughts from anybody on the West Fadness Lake thing? That's about it. The only reason why I put it in here was to see if there was any follow-up, since we've had a half an hour to think about it.
I mean, I'll say that from my point of view, I have the follow-up that I will be getting, and I'll share anything that I send to them, I'll send to you as well, so that you can take a look at it. I'll send it to you first, and then you can provide some input to me directly before I pass it along. Actually, we could just do it in the next board packet too, since their meeting's not till the end of April, but yeah, I'll definitely provide that to you so that you can provide feedback before I pass it along.
Yeah, when you have it, as soon as you have it and when it's appropriate, I would like to see you send it out to us. So it's, I don't know what's going to be in the next board packet, but sometimes they get to be pretty heavy tomes. If we have something that is prepared ahead of time and it's appropriate to send to the board, so we have a chance to look through it, digest it and give you some input, that would be a good thing.
Okay, sounds good.
I really like that idea, and I just want to digest, our discussion a little bit. It was helpful, and so I would suggest that we add it to the agenda again for the next meeting to keep it tagged in and see if there's anything we want to do at that point.
Yep, it'll stay on the agenda, definitely. Item number D is wetland policies in the 10-year plan. We had a discussion of wetland policies before at the last meeting, I'd say. from my point of view, I actually went back and looked at some of the old meeting minutes and board packets, actually. We've been grinding around about this. The comment was made about the 10-year plan isn't due until, I think, 2026, something like that. But I've found with 10-year plans, if you're continually looking at them and updating them, when you get to the 10-year plan, it's not quite as big of an issue. And I also recall that before the pandemic hit and freaked us all out for a period of time, I had started to look, and Brad, I know you asked some questions about this, about looking at the parts of the 10-year plan, particularly the wetlands from my point of view, to see if there were other things that, other ways that we could write things. And so what I'm looking for here is to get some feedback from engineering staff and from Tina on where we should be looking. A couple of things I would like to, and I mentioned this before, one of the things that I know when we had the wetlands workshop and Bowser made it clear that flooding of a wetlands is not required to do anything about it. But my position still is, if we are the ones that flood the wetland, I think we need to look at a reset strategy or a reset policy. And I'd like somebody to take a look at what that would mean. I referenced the Grass Lake management plan that had a reset policy in it. I don't know what they would do if it didn't reset, but they had a standard in there. And I also know, and Cliff, you made the point that, okay, a lot of these things that we take over, we're dumping water into them, they were old things. But I think we ought to take a look at trading off. We're looking at a program to identify places that would create wetlands. You know, what's the trade-off between spending our money and our time creating little wetlands and versus looking at policies that we might have to keep the wetlands in the condition they are? Because that's another thing that I'd like more definition on. Is what does preserve and protect mean? I'm still talking about that. I get the fact that a flooded wetland, no matter how it's flooded, can still be a Class A wetland. But if its characteristics have changed, not because of natural things, but because of unnatural things, how do we manage that? How do we think about that? And it may not be in the statutes, but from my point of view, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. That's what, in auto racing, that's what we call the gray areas. Those are the things that specify everything on the car, and what the good cars do is figure out the things that they haven't specified. So I would like somebody to take a look at that. Brad, you were gonna, a long time ago, you may have forgotten, but you were gonna start to take a look at that at some point. And I would like to have a little deeper dive, particularly before we get into looking at other wetlands or restoring wetlands. But if we are going to look at restoring wetlands, I would also like some thought process around, okay, we don't have anything we can find that's big enough to make a difference so that we don't send a wetland up north when they don't want to do it. But can we have an internal policy that says, okay, we're going to want to restore this wetlands, it makes a lot of sense, yada, yada, yada. And if you want to buy credits, you need to help us restore this wetlands as well as send them upstream so that we start to do a creation. So that's kind of, I know it's a little bit rambling, but it actually isn't rambling because I wrote it all down. And I'd like somebody to start thinking about this a little bit and start looking into the 10-year plan so that we just don't plop in. You know, I'd say from my, and Val, you may have the same experience. 10-year plans are difficult because life changes pretty fast. In fact, we've seen things change pretty fast. And our plan is a good plan, it's not that. but as things change, I think we want to take a look at it. For me, one of the areas is the wetlands, as far as particularly when we look at storage, because we talk about storage. If we have a flood, we're going to store the water someplace. How do we get it out, or do we get it out? Or, that's the kind of thought process I'd like somebody to take a look at.
Can I just jump in here real quick? I think one thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is the need to define our terms to make sure everybody is clear about what we mean when we say different terms that I've heard I heard you say a few different things, and I'm like, I would really like to help define those things or have you define those with the board together. So I think that would be one of our first steps, is to look at how we can make sure we're all talking the same language when we talk about reset or storage or some of the flooded wetlands, and just talk through those things as well. I think we could really have a good facilitated discussion around what's in our plan, what's missing, what needs to be added in order to address some of those concerns that you have around wetlands. And I think those are all really good conversations. I think we could have a facilitator like even Melissa's still here as our board conservationist. That's one of the tasks we could ask Bowser to help us with, is just to talk through some of these issues so that we can have a good discussion around how to move forward. But I think that's all good. And I think it's certainly something we can do over the next year.
I think that's a great idea. Cliff?
Yeah, just a short comment, kind of a parting comment. Part of the strategy in our whole wetland rule was to avoid those kinds of impacts from stormwater discharges. It can go further, but one of the things we should analyze too is, does our wetland rule do enough? But for example, we don't allow direct discharges anymore, untreated.
Right.
We do look at volume of discharge a lot more than we used to. So I don't think we really have those wetlands that are where there's discharges that are detrimental to the quality of the wetland. Those changed dramatically in the last 20 years. So I think in the analysis that's done by staff and BAR, I think we should definitely consider the fact of what's been done to address those kinds of issues, and maybe then what more needs to be done. Just so we don't ignore what we've already done and what's already in rule.
Oh, no, I agree. I think the rules are fine the way that they're formulated. That's not my issue. I'm looking at going beyond that. Diane?
Yeah, I like your idea that we don't leave it all to do all at once. And also Tina's suggestion of starting with definitions. What I would appreciate is a suggestion from staff and BAR or whoever of how we should divide up the 10-year plan to make it into manageable pieces. So it's not a yearly review of the whole thing, but it also doesn't wait 10 years. Do we take an issue like the one Larry's bringing up and do that after the definitions, and then look at another one? But we're going to have to decide as a board how much time we're willing to spend on this, in addition to the other things already on our plate. Are we going to add a workshop, or are we going to pick a couple meetings with lighter agendas? So if you guys could kind of noodle that around a little bit and maybe come back with some ideas, I think it could make for the best product and also the best workload management to make some adjustments in that process that way. But I'm not quite sure where to start other than those two ideas.
Sure.
Pam, you have a comment? You're on mute, Pam.
Same thing. Yeah, I apologize for being late. And just Larry, yeah, I think it's always good for us to review our policies and think about them and what changes we might make. But Larry, you had said, when I heard you say that, maybe I misheard, but that the watershed district caused Grass Lake to become flooded. Is that true? And I mean, of course, we always make sure we try not to, cause damage. And if we do, to undo it if we can. But did I misunderstand, Larry?
I didn't recall that I said that. So I'll have to go back and look at the tape and see what I did.
Well, I think
I
the
might have misheard. I just might have misheard, so.
I think it was, well, so we talked, I think you mentioned unnatural versus natural flooding.
Right.
And so, and that was one of the terms I would need, help defining so that we understand what we mean by unnatural versus natural. And
right.
Yeah.
And we've had some with technical review papers that have come in of buffering things that could be enacted retroactively. Some of them were kind of cheap. I remember that. We haven't cataloged those. Somebody can go back and find them. I know where mine are. But those are strategies I think we want to take a look at because, I get it that we can't retrofit everything, or should we want to, but if there are critical things that would help preserve the wetlands in the condition that they're in, if they're being overrun. When I first got into this, I passed out a paper from Denny Anderson from the Star Tribune where they talked about the fact that wetlands, and they were actually talking about wetlands up north with where the farmers pump in, PAMU, and on those tours up there. But this up and down from artificial input is tough on wetlands and is tough on the things that work in wetlands. So I think anything that we can do to help that will help us preserve and meet, not only meet our requirements, but meet our obligations, if you will, to the wetlands that we have in the area. But that's where I want to go. I like your idea, Tina, of getting together and talking about the definition so we're all clear on that and then moving on from there. Yep.
I totally agree with the definitions, and I think another next step, and Tina and I can work on the kind of the scope of this effort, but use as an example, I think you put it out there, Larry, preserve and protect. What does that mean? Does that mean no changes? Does it mean some changes, or how much change still fits within that category? I think that's important that we understand where that threshold is. Otherwise, I don't want the district to back itself into a corner, and now every change you're feeling as though you've got a policy to address, when as we heard last month, the wetland systems are dynamic. There's fluctuations over time that happen, and it's not all necessarily a negative. So we need to kind of figure out where those thresholds are at. But I think that's something that Tina and I can scope out and bring back.
And that's all I'm looking for at this point. Yeah. And again, moving on to work that we're talking about again, trying to identify places where we can maybe resurrect or improve wetlands or things like that. Should be a part of our overall strategy as stewards of these few remaining resources that we have, if you will. Okay, so we'll move ahead with that. We'll put that back on the agenda for the next time and just keep working on it until it gets figured out. Okay, presentations. Item 12, District Inspection Standardization Project Update.
Yes, Tyler is here. Hi, Tyler.
Hi. I'm going to share my screen if that's possible.
Yep, you can go ahead.
Okay. So this is the presentation that was included in this month's board packet. But essentially what I'm going to talk about tonight is an update on our project where we're looking at the standardization of the inspection process and prioritizing maintenance need for future CIPs. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tyler. I'm a water resources engineer at BAR. I think I've met most of you, but there's some new faces to me. So I've been at BAR for almost 5 years now and work a lot with Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District, as well as other watersheds and cities in the Twin Cities area. So happy to be here. So the development of this tool really stemmed from a need for a more standardized inspection process of all the systems that the district owns and maintains, including the creeks and other infrastructure, water quality and flood management facilities. And then really the ultimate goal of this tool and this project is to be able to prioritize all of the inspected infrastructure into somewhat of a list that can be helpful in selecting next year's maintenance projects, and having really a reason for why we're selecting those projects and data to back that up. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to dive into the different components and steps that we used in our methodology to develop this tool that we have now. But on this slide is just an overview of what has been done to date. And that includes reviewing previous inspection data, which includes notes from past inspections completed by Dave and other bar staff, selected project from past CIPs, different prioritization strategies used in the district, one of which is the water quality prioritization framework that was developed in 2020, as well as some other prioritization frameworks that we reviewed. We also looked at all the different data that was available. Carrie provided us with all of the GIS data. So we looked at the different types of facilities and infrastructure, and categorized everything to help frame the tool. And then we developed a scoring system for each inspection. And that's really what is driving this prioritization piece of the tool, where we can get an ultimate score, and that score can be used to create a list for looking at all the different maintenance needs. And then finally, most recently, we've created a mobile data application that can be used during the inspections in the field. And tied to that is an online database that we can use to track records and past inspections and other useful data, which is all managed through a software put out by ArcGIS. And I'll go into all of this in a little bit more detail. But to help kind of walk through the development of this tool, I wanted to use a couple visuals. So this shows all of the infrastructure that we have in GIS that's going to be part of this tool, but I'm actually going to dive into a pond as an example that really shows how the tool and how the framework was set up to be used. But here you can see we have all the different types of infrastructure like ponds and creeks and pipes. And I should note that the belt line is not included in any of this. That has its own inspection process. This is really looking at culverts and other kind of pipes that connect different facilities. So the site that I'm gonna, skipped ahead one. The site that I'm gonna reference is this pond. It's down in the Fish Creek watershed. There's nothing significant about it other than that it is a site that was inspected. So just using that as a visual. So we'll come back to that in a couple slides. So like I was talking about, the category development, we reviewed several different data sets, including the past CIPs and inspection notes that I mentioned. And the goal is really to create a sufficient number of categories to keep all the BMP types separate that we're looking at, and BMP and infrastructure types, but not to create so many that we're just creating a really cumbersome and clunky tool that has a ton of different fields that you're going through. And then we also wanted to include some catch-all categories, like other categories or miscellaneous categories, to help capture inspections and new sites potentially that don't fit a category, so that this tool can really be used in the long term and we don't have to update it all the time. So there's some redundancy built in. And so following the category development, we developed criteria for each category. So there can be several criteria that are within a category, and the criteria are specific to the categories, not to make the inspection application too complicated, but we're including kind of a range of criteria that Dave and others have looked at in the field to really make a best assessment while we're in the field, and use all of that to score and then prioritize in the office when we come back from doing the field inspections. And like every aspect of the tool, the criteria that were developed, like I said, were based on input from Ramsey-Washington and bar staff, using what they typically look at during the inspection. So a lot of this was already developed and already in people's heads, but it was really just a matter of getting it down on paper and electronically. So to look at our example site, this is showing all the criteria that we developed just for ponds. So you can see that there's delta formation, there's erosion around the pond, cattail formation, and then availability of pond storage. And this doesn't include the inlets to the pond or the outlets of the pond, but all of those different categories would be part of one site. And you can see that there's different levels of criteria based on the conditional assessment that's made in the field. And so all of that ties into the scoring system. So to quantify the maintenance needs, including the level of damage, the importance of performing maintenance, and other factors that are affecting really the prioritization of activities, we created this scoring system. And I think based on one of the manager's recommendations, we used a system of 1 to 4 so that there's no middle score, which helps the prioritization process and also helps from unbiasing different inspections where it's easy to put a 3 down if you come across a site that really doesn't have something stand out significantly. So on the next slide, you'll see how the score is assigned to each of the criteria we just looked at. But I also want to talk a little bit about a couple of other aspects that are tied into the score. So we have 2 static scores that are applied to each inspection. One is associated with risk. So it's defining the risk of failure of a piece of infrastructure that would be developed. And these risk scores are going to be pre-populated for each piece of infrastructure and tied to the project location and the consequence of it failing, like I said. So that could be using past modeling to look at how many homes would be impacted if a pipe failed, looking at other proximity to structures or roads or emergency roads, I guess. And then additionally, we have a time score. So how sensitive is the infrastructure maintenance need to longevity? Does it need to be repaired in a year? Does it need to maybe be reassessed in 3 to 5 years? So we included time and risk to really get the probability of what maintenance needs are going to be popping up each year in our CIP planning. And then the total score is added up for each category and criteria for different sites. And then that's all normalized by the number of components so that a really complex pond with 5 inlets and a really complex outlet structure isn't outweighing maybe a really basic pond that has 1 inlet and 1 outlet, so that we can have our list be pretty apples to apples as much as we can when we're looking at it at the end of the year. And then obviously the top scorers of the list would be prioritized for maintenance ideally. And the way that we designed the tool is that the scoring and the assessment and eventually the prioritization would all happen at the desktop level back in the office after the inspections are done in the field. So that way there's manual review that's being built into it. There's engineering review and assessment that's being conducted and looking at the scoring and the adjustments that we can make as necessary, kind of based on all the data that we collect. Because it's not going to be perfect and there's going to be some adjustment that's needed, but hopefully it gives us a pretty final list just from all this automation that we've built. And this also gives us redundancy and checks in case anything was missed in the field or maybe misrepresented. So we're still going through all the data again and making sure that things are making sense. So looking at our example of the pond, based on last year's inspection.
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate if it's a complex system with many ins and outs, that you have to represent that system as with a single score. If there is a component in that system that is really high off the charts, would you focus more on that component? Or I'm a little worried it might get hidden if the rest of the components in like a good dry year demonstrate that whole system doesn't need maintenance. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think that's a good example and a good question. I think that's where that engineering review comes in. So if it's the outlet of a pond that has 7 inlets, I don't even know if that exists in the district, but if it's the outlet that really needs maintenance, that's really critical to the pond, you know, because it's draining it, it's preventing flood risk upstream of the pond. And so if that's something that were to come up, if it would need maintenance, we would just probably automatically flag it and add it to the CIP for the following year. So there is still some manual review, but all of those things would at least be scored initially to give us kind of an idea of where we're sitting for the next year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was, so we can always quantify as much of this as possible, which I'm completely for, but there's a level of critical thinking that I want to make sure we don't lose out on. And so as long as there's a pathway there, I'm happy.
Yep, for sure. Good question. So looking at the pond based on last year's inspections, actually, these are our approximate scores that we would have assigned. So there's not much to look at here other than kind of going through each of the criteria. There's a pretty big delta in this pond, so we would have given that a 3 of 4. Maybe it needs maintenance in the 2 to 3 year time frame. Very minimal erosion, very minimal cattail formation, and it's about 25% full of sediment, so we would have given that a 2. So this just gives you an idea of the thought process that inspectors and the engineers back in the office are looking at each site by, based on the information that's collected in the field. So the final kind of step that we've taken thus far is developing this mobile application to be used in the field. And we've done that using Field Map, which is an ArcGIS software, like I said. And using this software allows all of the existing GIS information that the district has to be tied into a database that we're managing online and in the cloud that can be referenced in the field. So the way that it gets set up, generally speaking, is that we have a point for each piece of infrastructure or each site that's being inspected. And that point can store inspection records, it can store design information, photos, notes from past inspections, and a lot of other information, which gives us a lot of flexibility in the field when we're not able to pull up all of our paper plans or log into our computers. We can see a lot of that information and not only conduct the inspection, but also look at things a little more holistically, see, okay, this is the as-built, how much has this pond filled in, for example. And we can also add or track new infrastructure with this software, which if inspectors come across a culvert that's failing, that's not necessarily owned by the district, we can perform our inspection and add it to our map and then pass all that information along to whatever member city owns that, for example. We can also set up flags in the application for automatic desktop review. So Manager Val, that's probably where we would do that. If we see a really bad outlet, we would just automatically flag it to review and then probably add to the maintenance list if it's really bad. And then the other nice thing about this program is it allows us to set up templates and run reports based on all the inspections. So each year after we've completed our inspections, we can get a 1-pager for each piece of infrastructure that was inspected. That would give us the condition assessment, the score we gave it, any notes, any photos, and all of that could be compiled into the annual report, or it could be passed on to cities. If they own the infrastructure, we could give them a PDF and say, here's this culvert, here's what we saw, do with it what you will. And so I just have some screen grabs of really what this application looks like. So you can see the full base map here and all of the background data we have. It includes sub-watershed boundaries, storm sewer, creeks, water bodies, all of the kind of basic information we would include in a map. And then if you really dial into a site, this isn't the same pond, but it's another pond example. You can zoom into the site, you can click on the point, and then all the fields that I mentioned with all the criteria and categories would pop up, and the inspector would be able to go through and complete their inspection pretty quickly by just clicking on the different conditional assessments that we've defined for each category. And there's places to take notes and add photos, like I said. So yeah, inspectors are filling in the fields, their drop downs, their radio buttons. So we're really trying to make this as seamless as possible and not add more time in the field, but making sure that we're being thorough and collecting a lot of data. So our next steps, we're gonna finalize the application. There's a couple of updates. I'm not a GIS expert, but there are a couple important updates coming out soon that will help us streamline the app even more. And then really the next big step is doing a trial run of using this in the field. Dave and probably some bar staff will go out and test out the iPad, see what information they collect, figure out what bugs there are, or if we need to add any features, or if some features aren't really useful, so that all of it can be polished and ready to go for the actual inspections later this summer, early fall. So that's where we're at right now. I'd be happy to answer any more questions if there are any, but otherwise we'll keep putting updates in the project status report, and stay tuned for later this spring.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the presentation. I think it was well done. I'm interested in, I'm not saying that you have to quote unquote validate the tool. That one pond instance was really informative. Is there plans to look at maybe some other extremes or other solutions to help make sure that it's covering all the some of the variation that we see?
Yeah, I think one of the options would be to go to CIP sites that were selected for this year and do another inspection and see, like, pseudo calibrate the tool, if you will, to make sure that we're capturing all the data we saw last year. And if there's any new data that we missed, I think that would be a good way to check the tool. But yeah, really using Dave's knowledge and bar staff's knowledge of what sites typically have problems, we'll make sure we hit those so that we're able to capture more than just ones and zeros in the tool.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
I just think it's really exciting. It's the kind of tool that we've talked about for a long time. So it's hopefully streamlines things dramatically. And we've always done the same kinds of things, but on paper or notepads, and tried to transfer it in-house. And this would be a much more transparent way to do it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a industry leading project that we have and tool that we have. I'm excited about it. Is there a way that something pops out that has to be done right away versus putting it on next year's CIP?
Yeah, I think that's just a flag that we would include in the field, and Dave would pass that information along to Brad, and Brad would get our engineers going on any emergency maintenance that needs to happen. Yeah.
I really like this too, and it's going to be really interesting to follow it along as you test it out. One of the things we've talked about in this maintenance discussion is that after we do some work in some area, like dredging out a flow path or something, that it requires more frequent checkups. So is there something in there that kind of makes an exception for areas that we've just done work to prioritize those for a year or two, or how are we going to factor that in?
Yeah, that's a good question. From my understanding, I think all of the sites are inspected every year. So correct me if I'm wrong, Dave or Tina, but I think it would get captured annually anyways, but that could be something we look into, of adding a field where if it needs special inspection, we would be able to note that.
Well, yeah, something that's done in the spring, we may want to twice a year, one in the fall, so that it's ready for the next flow path.
I think
snow melt.
I think we could probably work in a reminder, or some sort of set a frequency kind of way to trigger a reminder that we're going to be out there again at a certain time, what we think is appropriate.
Yep.
Yeah, and the big driver with this one too is to help out in the fall and get that overall inspection done, and then we can kind of piecemeal once we get this one together. But yeah, that is a good idea to get that and make sure we can record when I check things middle of summer in the spring, wintertime, just kind of as it goes along.
Yeah, because it settles, the land settles in after a bit, but usually for a year or two, I think we found some more changes. And the other thing I wanted to say is I found the pond example really interesting because you've got such detailed criteria now. You had a higher score for the delta formation and everything else was a 1 or a 2. So do we just go with an overall total average, or do we look at, like you said, maybe looking again at that delta in a year, or how do you flag that?
Yeah, initially it would be a total for the whole site. And so it might not get flagged for maintenance depending on how the entire list shakes out. But yeah, every year we'd be able to inspect it, and likely every year the score would get worse. So eventually it would make its way onto the CIP list.
Yeah, the only question is whether it makes it easier and prevents future problems to do it sooner when you see something starting.
Right. And that's where that time score comes into, that we can kind of play with that and be able to bump it up if we need to.
Good. This will be fun. I hope we keep getting reports on it.
For sure.
And Tina, just for a future meeting, if possible, once they've gone through an inspection, it might be nice to visit in, like, how does this map into the communication strategy, right? That how do we talk to these other owners of the BMPs, right? I think that would be an interesting thing just to revisit once we collect enough data to say, oh, that railroad company really needs to do something. Here's the data that we have.
Yeah, definitely. We can bring that back again.
The other thing that might be fun if we get back into the tour business is selecting some sites that are illustrative of the model here and letting us look at those.
Yeah.
Thoughts. Thank you, Tyler. By the way, I had a couple of years ago wandering around, found a number of issues maintenance wise. I wrote up in a kind of memo. I think I'll send that to you to take a look so that if I can find it, that may help provide some examples, see if they're still there, if they've been fixed or if what's going on with it. So I'll send you that memo that you can maybe incorporate in some of the things that you're looking at.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
This is exciting, it really is.
It's a fun project.
I see a paper coming out of this.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll go to someplace fun like Hawaii instead of.
Yeah, I gotta find that conference. Thanks, Tyler.
Yep, no problem.
Great job. Appreciate it. Okay, now we have the flood reduction. I lost my thing here. The Owasso Basin North Star States Flood Improvement Scope Summary.
Yeah, there isn't a formal presentation, but Brad, if you want to talk through it a little bit and we can answer any questions.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you recall, a couple of years ago, we had a discussion around the Owasso Basin area, and that led to what we were calling, well, we should start the process of taking care of that low-hanging fruit, right? So we cleaned out the downstream Jarvis Creek and adjacent to North Star Estates, that area got cleaned out. And then we advanced into another element that we are just finishing up this year, that is increasing the culverts in Keller Parkway and doing the improvements in Ryan Drive. And so all of those were kind of the first chunk of things to help make some incremental improvements to the Owasso Basin area, but also to start to step our way through some of the broader improvements that need to be made. Now, this next step is basically taking what we've done so far and recharacterizing the actual flood impact in and around the Wausau Basin, and then moving to the next step of possible improvement. So, getting cost estimates pulled together, understanding kind of, what direction we want to go with these last elements that are the smaller ones in nature in and around the Wausau Basin. If you recall, last year, we also talked about, as a part of some of the originally proposed work, we were going to build a water quality, a water quantity kind of storage basin north of Owasso Boulevard and kind of straight west of North Star Estates. Well, through further investigation, that property is no longer available. So we need to relook at how we can deal with the floodwaters that are just west of Owasso Basin, and that also gets done through this effort. Where we're starting to work with the City of Little Canada. They have helped us out with some survey information in North Star Estates so we can better understand too how those manufactured homes actually sit on the property. We were just using LiDAR data before, but they've gathered some actual survey data. And as a part of this work, we are also going to be coming back to the board and trying to give illustrations that will help the board make a decision on, what part of our rule, which isn't specific to manufactured housing, how will we apply that rule? Will it be to the low floor? Well, as you can imagine, many of these manufactured homes sit well above the property, and is that appropriate? Or is there something else that is more comparable to how we, flood protect for other residential properties around the district? So we'll come back with that as a part of this effort. So all those are kind of a part of what's in the scope summary and how we think the next step in this process should go. And you can see there's a schedule laid out. We'll have a few items ready for you in April and May, and then our thought is there will be capital improvements that will need to be done to this area to help alleviate some of that flooding. And we want to get to a point, by midsummer, late summer, early fall, I think, so we can budget for that in 2023.
I had a question, Brad. Would you mind with the task 1 when you're redefining the flood risk around the Owasso Basin? We had talked a couple of meetings ago around trying to do a bit additional modeling around the 10-year flood. Those other, could you add that to that task as well? I know it just says 100-year, but I want to make sure that we at least do that. It helps stratify the risk.
Sure. Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to ask about. And are we going to incorporate things like what I would call dwell time? So we cleaned out Jarvis Creek so we could get rid of the water faster, hopefully. Looking at, are we willing to accept that the water may come up in the 100-year flood for like a day and go down? Whereas if we hadn't done that, it would be up for 5 days. And or looking at strategies that say like, all right, for these houses, we would recommend, or that then maybe we do it, raise the utilities under the house so that they're higher, so that if it does happen, they're not compromised, and have some sort of a temporary way that people can get to those houses.
That will be a part of this process, trying to, again, some of these are policy and rule decisions and how we apply those. And I think it's our job as staff and engineers to bring back, comparable situations and information that maybe FEMA or other regulatory organizations have out there. So you can say, here's how we should protect this so we're consistent across the district. And that may go to temporary flood protection. Again, as you were kind of alluding to, Larry, if it floods for a short amount of time and goes back down, but there needs to be access that's provided. That's kind of a temporary and removable type approach. Whereas, there may be other scenarios where you say, well, it'd be comparable for this series within North Star Estates to do an actual improvement of their property and possibly get it up 1, 2, 3 feet higher. Just depends. But I think it's something the board will have to, I think, wrestle with on how to apply the rules that you have and the policies that you've been working with around flood control to a manufactured home, property like that.
Yeah, because I know that North Star Estates is important to Little Canada from a low-income housing point of view or affordable housing point of view is a better way to put it. Because one place in there you talk about flood insurance. The minimum your flood insurance cost is $500, and that's a lot of money, I think, for people that would live in that area. Not to be demeaning to them, but it's still a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the strategies I think that we ought to talk to Little Canada about too, is that, do we designate these places as being flood prone and then maybe cause them to have flood insurance? Or I doubt if they have mortgages, but I don't know how they'd want to look at the overall situation.
Well, it is part of the discussion that we're having between district staff and the City of Little Canada, and then ultimately with the property manager, property owner, and try to better understand the individual situations that are on these properties that we believe are at risk of flooding. Cliff?
Just wondering if you've done any research on with maybe contacting FEMA or some other organizations about possible approaches that have been done with other mobile home communities, because they tend to be in areas where there's cheaper land, and a lot of that is in lower elevation properties. Anyway,
FEMA has produced a document that we've come across that has a lot of the way they approach it, but it is more geared towards if you're developing a flood or a property that's susceptible to flooding and it's going to be a manufactured home, here's some of the things you should consider, or these are ways you might want to deal with it. But that is about the only resource we've found yet. Now, we haven't done an extensive search, but FEMA has that document that might help.
I read through that document, Brad. It seems like it sets some like bare minimum requirements for manufactured homes is what it seems like. And given the context of some of the tasks, it sounds like you're considering maybe adding that freeboard or whatever they're calling it, the FEMA piece.
Right. Right.
Could I ask a subsequent question or a related one on the stakeholder outreach that you mentioned earlier? It sounded to me that you're also reaching out to them to see if there's any areas that maybe the modeling didn't show as a prone to flooding, or maybe there's. Did I interpret that correctly? That you'll engage some of the people that live there, or the owner of the property to maybe highlight hot spots that we might not have seen through modeling?
Yeah, and we have worked with this particular property manager who manages the property for the owner, and have done some basic internal modeling to help them better understand what they could do to improve drainage within the system itself. So I guess I say that because we already are in those discussions, or have been in the past. So there's an openness to hearing what we have to say and working with us. So yes, but we'll continue those, and we want to know about those those areas that potentially the model has missed or mischaracterized.
Okay, good. Look forward.
Okay.
Look forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you for the update.
You bet. And you already see it as a budgeted item. This was something we highlighted coming into the year. This is just more of the detailed around the scope.
Right, definitely.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Tina, 13, Administrator's Report.
Yes, so I know we already discussed a few, well, the COVID update, but we can continue through. I have my meetings attended and upcoming meetings listed. And then the office COVID update is the next item on there. Welcome for any suggestions, thoughts, comments on what I have written there. Like I said, at one point, this is definitely an adaptive management strategy. We'll kind of take a step forward and see how it goes. And I'll be working really closely with individual staff to, look at their job duties and then how it looks in the greater scheme of an office setting for these days. But I don't see there being any major hiccups. Most of our staff have been going in at least part-time to the office. Our field staff, when it's field season, was working in the field pretty significantly. So yeah, like I said, it'll be a transition, but we'll work through it. And as I mentioned earlier too, since I wrote this, the CDC did change their guidance on masking. So at this point in time, it would be considered recommended but not required in the office setting. Any thoughts? Any comments? No, we good. I'll give you an update as we go along through that. The board appointment process, I don't have any updates other than what I've written there. So the application did close on Friday. I asked Ramsey County staff for an update on number of applications received and an estimate on when they think the appointment will be made, but I have not heard back from them yet. So, but when I did talk to staff before I wrote the packet, they had anticipated that it would be a mid-March appointment so that the new person would be ready for the April meeting. Waterfest, as we move into, like I said, this new era with COVID, we are planning a more normal in-person event for this year, a one-day on June 4th. So that is going back to our usual date for Waterfest, that first Saturday after Memorial Day is how we look at that. We're just really digging into the planning and just thinking through all the different components. So I'll have more information in upcoming meetings, but mark your calendars for that date. And then the mod legislative event. You should have received a message. Sometimes I don't know what goes directly to you and what comes to me, but did you receive messages about the mod legislative event?
It's 16th or 17th or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're interested in attending, if you could let me know by March 6th so that we can get you registered. That's the early bird registration. There is, let's see, on Wednesday afternoon is the mod board of directors meeting, and then the legislative briefing is in the afternoon at 4 o'clock. Followed by a networking event, and that's all at the Doubletree Hotel in St. Paul. And then on Thursday, they moved the breakfast from the Capitol to the hotel, so the breakfast will actually be at the hotel as well. And they did that because most of the legislators are not officing out of their offices so much. So they go to the Capitol for any hearings or committee meetings they have, but they're inviting them to come to the breakfast at the hotel since they're not at the Capitol anyway. And it's a little unclear because I think some of the committee meetings actually start at 8:30. So I'm not sure how many will attend the breakfast. Usually it's only a couple, if any. But that is on Thursday morning. The biggest component, I would say, of this for you would be the legislative briefing and discussion on Wednesday evening, if you're interested in attending.
On the note about Fest, how did Freeze Fest go?
Yeah, so Sage said that it went, Phelan Freeze Fest was last Saturday, and she said that it was a really great day. They had good weather. It was a beautiful day, actually. And that they had quite a bit of community involvement and attendance. So it was a good day.
Good.
And that's all I have, unless you have anything else for me.
Oh, I don't. Does anybody else have anything? Okay.
Great.
Project and program status report. Anybody have any questions besides me? A question would be, and I'm not sure who can answer it, why is Roseville so reluctant to participate in this on Frog Pond?
Well, so they were hesitant because they were going to put in their own system and they didn't want a delay in that because of some resident pressure they were getting from residents that live on that pond. They've been asking for it for a while. And then they said we could again, and Bill, you can jump in here too if you'd like, but then they weren't sure they wanted to, the type of system that we were proposing was different than what the residents were expecting on Frog Pond. So Bill, I don't know, you want to add to that?
Yeah, it sounds like the neighborhood was really bent on having a big fountain. So the city granted their wishes and installed a massive fountain in the center of Frog Pond. And that is not what we had in it really on the agenda for aeration. We wanted to do a subsurface bubble aeration system. So we talked to the city numerous times about modifying that and turning off the fountain and trying this aeration system. And so far, they're not interested in doing it. Kind of plan B is to look at aerating Bennett Lake, which would be a bigger project, but it sounds like the city sort of has the infrastructure in place to do that, and it would be economical. And Bennett also has very low dissolved oxygen levels in the summertime. So it looks like that would, an aeration system in Bennett would be a really nice addition to that system as well. So we may kind of do an audible and look at that seriously. And it sounds like the city is interested in partnering with us on that project. So it may turn out to be a blessing in disguise right now.
Has there been carp removal in Bennett?
Yes, we removed several hundred carp out of Bennett, and we've made real progress there.
Okay, good.
Okay. The question I had was on targeted retrofits. It's kind of interesting. The two projects proposed are quite dramatically different in the cost per pound of phosphorus. Where did the two target projects end up? Do we know? I see this little graph here, but Where did they end up as far as cost per pound?
I don't know off the top of my head. We have that. I'd have to look that up though, Larry.
Okay. just
But I
curious.
think they were a little bit on the higher end just
Yeah, yeah, they started out on the higher end.
because they were, you know, we had the
Sure.
treatment. Yeah. Yeah, we
Okay.
can look that up.
And the only other comment I had on projects was the technical description of using beet juice to mix with salt to de-ice roads.
Yeah.
The drawback, I'm reading an interesting book, which is odd for me, but it's about 10 Mile Lake and it's about fishing. Why it's odd for me is because I'm not a fisherman. I don't even. But I had no idea how important mayflies were for fish. I always thought they were just there to coat the roads, make people slide around them on the highways. Is there any movement to actually use this in Minnesota? Because that would seem to be a big negative to me.
I'm not aware of anybody who is testing this in Minnesota.
Yeah, nor am I. No.
There was it syrup, maple syrup, that there was another product that was, I think Wisconsin had tried. Yeah, there was another project, I can't remember, that Wisconsin tried and had minimal results.
It's a byproduct. I can't remember what it is now. They were using it for a number of years. It actually was working pretty well, but they had a hard time keeping up with demand of the materials.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
It was interesting nonetheless. And normally I wouldn't be that sympathetic to mayflies. How important they were to things like walleye and stuff.
It was a cheese brine.
Oh yeah, cheese brine.
Byproduct
Yeah.
of cheese
That
manufacturing.
makes sense for Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah, cheese brine. Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I did have one question, Larry, if you would mind, on Bill's report. I was kind of curious as I read the abstract. There is mention of, you know, the impact on deep lakes versus the shallow lakes that were being treated. That seems like an interesting interaction. Is there something there that we should study further to understand why it seems that some of the deep lakes didn't have a similar effect when you cleaned out upstream shallow ones?
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out, Val. I think, you know, that's something that's really quite curious to staff and kind of surprising that we saw that effect. The difference is pre and post management in the deep lakes were significantly different, but if you look at the means, they're very tight. So we had minimal variance in those numbers. So we saw a slight increase in total phosphorus pre and post management periods. Not a huge deal, but what's interesting is we're not seeing the dramatic effects that we saw in shallow lakes through management versus the deep lakes. So I think that's the real take home here is we could really do awesome things in deep lake or in shallow lakes and see those dramatic differences in the shallow lakes, but deep lakes, it's a much tougher road.
If there was more time permitted, I'd love it at some point just to understand it. That ran counterintuitive to what I was thinking, and so it was really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that was a very interesting finding for sure.
Oh,
Larry, you're muted.
Any other comments on the projects or? Okay, any final comments from the managers?
We'll miss you, Cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Godspeed, Cliff.
Thank you. It'll
If
be,
if you want to follow her, I'll do it, man. You tell me where to go.
Right.
if you're out and about, let me know, and maybe I'll meet up with you. But yeah, it'll be an exciting adventure.
Yeah.
Got 4 trips planned this year already. It
Nice.
may meld from one to the other, who knows?
Awesome.
Mhm.
That's great. We're gonna miss you, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Okay, that's about it. Anybody got anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Okay, second?
Seconded.
Okay,
Great.
favor, yay, okay.
You know,
Thank you all. Bye.
Yes, good night. Good meeting, everyone. Thank you.
Good meeting, bye now.